Right, I believe we can probably start, I suppose. It's nice to see as many of you here as you are. Let me know if you can't hear me very well. Maybe we need to get the microphone hooked up. But I guess the room is not that big, so we'll do it just in a cozy fashion, but without any additional wiring. Anyways, I guess this is the part where I'm supposed to do an intro onto the topic and probably myself. But the thing is that after like 3 days to 2 weeks of intensive thinking of how that introduction should look like, the frustration kicked in, the monkey in my brain took over, and I launched Steam. So that kind of one thing led to another, and a couple of failed mission attempts and a dozen of in-game days later, at like 4 a.m. in the morning, I thought that, that game that I was playing wasn't either new or a AAA quality or anything, and yet it had a good package, which got me hooked and a couple of my colleagues after that. But the thing is that ideas which I'm going to talk about with you today are also neither new nor, groundbreaking. And yet, if you pack them all together, they do have a good punch, and they kind of make you hopeful that actually, that next turn may be game-changing. So why it's called the Never-Neverland? It's a completely different story, and we won't get into that because we don't have that much time. But this is the Never-Neverland. I guess the land in my brain which holds unrivaled potential and a bunch of unmet expectations. And today, I will try to walk you through the 5 sections of it. A waterfall resort, in which I will try to convince you that you just can't wake up one morning and be agile all of a sudden. It would be very cool if that happened, but it rarely does. Backlog Mountain holds practices which helped us to become more productive from the product perspective. Deep Dark Forest holds practices from the development processes side of things. Super quick stop at the megapolis of automation. And last but not least, a place I call the theme park, mostly because of the lack of imagination at 4 a.m. in the morning, and I have been lazy to change it ever since. So that's happening. Right. I don't know how it is with you, but to me it seems that anywhere I turn, everybody's doing agile. Everybody's doing 2-week-long sprints, aside from those who does them in like a quarter. Then everybody does daily stand-ups. Some have, the lucky ones even have plannings or retrospectives. Some have graduated onto including backlog refinement sessions into their schedules. But the thing is that if just following a certain framework would be enough, there wouldn't be such a big difference to what different teams can achieve in that same time frame, especially by employing similar practices. So I started thinking that a certain mindset is the key here. And the idea is that despite our job titles, each and every one of us should take responsibility of the quality of job that we do. And just out of the curiosity, do we have product owners here today? No, doesn't seem so. How about developers? Some, nice. How about fellow test engineers? We have a couple up front, yay. What else? Project managers? Some, cool. DevOps guys? A few. What else? Who did I forget?
Scrum Masters.
Scrum Masters. Nice, welcome Scrum Masters. Cool. So, like I was saying, despite those job titles, the thing is that at the end of the day, each and every one of us are doing something, and the quality of that work depends on how well we do it. So we should hold ourselves accountable to that responsibility. And that kind of goes to the idea that, if at least one person at your team or somebody along the development process are enjoying themselves there, while everybody else are frantically trying to adopt Agile, we will never be efficient. And then we will eventually come to the conclusion that Agile doesn't work, that it's a sham, and that's not true. Because dedication and collaboration of people can do great things. So don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that waterfall is the root of all evil or anything. It's a perfectly fine project management practice. It works on certain levels. People do it, it's okay. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that either all of us are sitting on that same Agile boat, rowing like crazy, or all of us are enjoying ourselves on the shore there. But if you take a look at the history books, you can kind of make a statistical calculation which one do make on the books more often. Just saying. That kind of leads me on to another thing. But if we are considering ourselves Agile, then thinking that a quality assurance department or a test engineer in your companies are the only people responsible for the quality is not true. And we should move away from that thinking. I guess now the question may be, what do they people supposed to do? What am I paying them for? And the thing is that even test engineers themselves sometimes get lost and fall back to the default of, oh, I need to find all the bugs. And the thing is that every test engineer knows that it's impossible. So basically those people are beating themselves over trying to achieve something they know full well is not possible. That would be amusing, but it's very unhealthy. So if you walk into the room before the release, you can look at the faces and you can tell who is the test engineer, because they would be like greenish gray with panic all over their face. Like I said, it would be funny, but it's very unhealthy. The thing is that, in my opinion, the job of those people, it's a support role. If you have a healer at your party in some game, that person is responsible for a certain role, but it's not responsible for your personal benefit. It takes care of the whole team. So it shouldn't be held accountable on the inadequacy of his party members, right? Everybody has a job to do. So the job of a test engineer is to help build the product a sustainable way to measure that quality. And without sugarcoating, that is often a case of writing some automated checks. But also it includes helping a team to build a certain mindset of the continuous feedback and continuous improvement. It contributes to defect detection, not only to defect detection, but as well to the defect prevention, which in my opinion is way more important. So yet again, to kind of go back a little, if each and every one of us do our job right, the test engineer is there to do his or her job right as well, but it's a different job than to go and find all the missing pieces that somebody else missed. He's there to help increase the quality of that product. So now the babbling bit is done, and we can move on to some more practical things of this whole presentation. It's not a surprise that the backlog mountain comes first, because it's very hard to be successful if you don't know what you are trying to achieve. So your backlog is the place which is supposed to answer all these questions. I don't know how many of you come from the Agile background, but I think everybody has heard the concept of a user story, and that the backlog is basically a mountain of those. Anyways, which we started doing, and like I said, it's nothing new or groundbreaking, maybe just a little bit different outlook at the practices. For us, the definition of ready is that first gate to what helps define a certain quality standard for your requirements. So how many of you know what the definition of ready is? Everybody is either lazy or I don't know what's going on. Come on, some exercising is good. At least I'm being told that it is. How many of you have it? Because knowing and not having is not really enough. How many of you remember what it says? With all the hands in the air, just a couple left. Well, that's the sad part of it, because if you are only employing a practice which you later on stuck into some wiki page and forget about it, it doesn't do you any good. So what we did, we wrote our definition of ready, which is very simple. We don't need a lot from our requirements. It's just that it has acceptance criteria so that we know what we are going to build, that it has mock-ups so that we know how it's going to look. And one other thing is that a team of developers, the Scrum team, have actually looked at the user story and rooted out all the questions up front before we start working on it. So we stick all those 3 simple things on a big piece of paper in our office space, because if you have some practice, but you don't remember what it says, it doesn't help. So one of the good things to do is have it and keep it somewhere visible. And yeah, the golden rule, don't allow the user stories which doesn't meet the quality, which would help you work on them efficiently straight away. Don't take them onto the sprints, because if you need to fall back to go and ask questions, you are wasting time, basically. Next one is definition of done. How many of you have that one? A little bit more. Okay. How many of you remember what it says? Because that one is usually longer. A few. Yet again, in our case, this is a tool which helps to keep the development team in check, so to say. We put a certain standard on what we expect from the deliveries. So in our case, the definition of done is yet again nothing unimaginable. It says that the code needs to be written. Well, that's a no-brainer. The code needs to be covered by unit tests. That's a little bit harder. Code needs to be reviewed, which is also a little bit harder to achieve. Then user story has a coverage of tests so that we know the scope of at least regression or what we check from time to time. Yeah, and that's probably it. And it gets demoed. That's one of the most important things, because even if you have the stakeholders who doesn't care what you do, which you're not supposed to, but sometimes it happens, it's a very beneficial practice to still do an internal demo, at least to your colleagues if you're working on different stories, because it helps to create that sense of achievement and creates an additional drive to actually deliver on something that you agreed to deliver. And same as with definition of ready, write it down somewhere visible, stick it on the wall in the development space, and follow it. Because just have it and not do it, not good enough. Cool. Now when it comes to the backlog, it's a common issue, so to say, that a backlog tends to fill up very fast with the defects or stories or anything else. And from the test engineer's perspective, we kind of take all the bugs very close to home. So it's very hard to close a defect if it's not fixed. It feels as if, oh, it's imperfect, I can't do it. But the truth is that anything that doesn't contribute to the quality of the product, or if you have a bunch of defects you know you're definitely not going to fix, just go through them, close them down, keep your backlog clean, prioritize, clean up outdated content, and also keep the expectations in place as well. So your backlog is something that tells your development team what we are trying to do, and then. So since we don't have any product owners in the room, it's probably pointless to say, but these people are the key of who needs to work out those details and manage the expectations. Also, we need not to forget the sneaky technical debt. So if you have a place in your application which you know needs some loving care, create a maintenance story and make sure that it gets properly prioritized. Because this is work as well. It's not only features, it's not, well, usually in the product owner's mind, it's like this: features, probably defects, and then maybe some maintenance work. We need to help them understand that we can't build something good on the shaky foundation. So there's that. Also, needless to say, team needs to dedicate some time in their sprints to address those defects and maintenance work. It needs to be clearly communicated. Okay, I don't know. Some people tend to think that, in Agile everything is loud. And it is allowed, but the Agile is not chaotic. At least I don't think of it as a chaotic practice. It tends to work if there are clear agreements which help. So it's kind of the same here, that like most of the people here, I guess, we bumped into the issue that we have been working on a huge application, which a lot of teams contributing into the same repo, into the same branch. So that was causing a lot of issues because we had no idea how to find which caused the problem which we bumped into. So first thing what we did was move on to the approach of having short-lived feature branches. That was the first iteration of how we did it. And then we added a continuous delivery enabled to the front of it. So it became a very cryptic, short name of it. But what it did was that if you have some automated checks, either unit or any other API, UI layer, it helps to deliver feedback only if it runs. So having every aspect of what you can do to increase the quality of your product run on your short-lived feature branch is very beneficial. One other thing that we agreed early on was we as test engineers, we don't take on testing something unless it has unit tests written and unless it's reviewed. At first, it was quite a huge pushback, saying that it kind of wastes a lot of time. Well, it seemed to, because developers need to spend time to do peer reviews, they need to write unit tests up front. But actually, what it did, it helped to create a culture of testing your own work. That's the first. And then that would normally root out the trivial bugs if something is not matching the acceptance criteria. Then, if anybody else looks at your code, that helps to validate that your approach is okay and add additional feedback onto that. And it also roots out a couple of defects along the way. So when the test engineer gets to actually testing the user story, he or she can think of the more creative scenarios, how to break it. We no longer need to worry about the basic things because the acceptance criteria are normally covered already. So, and instead of checking that the button is the wrong color, your test engineers can concentrate on to building that sustainable way of keeping the quality in check, because otherwise we won't have time for that. And one other thing is that same as you test anything in your product, it's a good practice to test your practices. Because as the team grows, as the product grows, it needs some readjustment. So I don't need to tell you how important the retrospectives are. But the thing is that just to hold a retrospective every other time is not enough, unless we are honest and unless we act on them too. So if we create some action items out of it, we need to make sure as a team that they get followed up on. And one other thing is that Agile is based on the collaboration and dedication of people. It's a collaboration of teams. And those teams and those people need to have a certain freedom. So it's okay to let your teams to choose their own approach on how they intend to work. And we tend to call it working agreements. I guess a lot of people do. Anyways, it's okay to let your teams to have some freedom on those, because as there are no people who are the same, teams will never be the same too. Yet again, make those agreements visible, because otherwise, if you stick them into the wiki, they get forgotten. And now, I'm pretty sure that, yeah, it's where you get to see my awesome drawing skills. I call it sticky figurism, and that's about a maximum of what my creative capacity is. But what I want to illustrate by this is that it doesn't need to make sense to you people here, as long as it makes sense to the team which agreed on those. But just to shed some light, the up top ones with the minimize word above the heads basically says that we need to, our goal is to minimize the transactions from quality assurance, from testing feedback onto the development. So that's why we employ the practice of code reviews and unit tests before we actually get into testing stage. Constant stream of deliveries, it kind of has a lot of under the hood. If possible, work on user stories in the sprint in parallel, so that not everything gets to the testing team in like the last day of the sprint. It's not a mini waterfall, because sometimes people would say, oh, Scrum is not that different because you would just have a 2-week-long waterfall. It isn't. That's the idea that people need to grasp. And it's different in that sense, that it's no longer a certain stages. Developers can test code, and they should. That's the whole idea of it. You don't need test engineers to babysit you. So there's that. Remind each other of deadlines, because we had some issues on those. Then you come to work one day and it was, oh, it's feature freeze. Oh, damn, half of our features are not done yet because everybody forgot that it was a feature freeze. I particularly like Code Complete Friday one. We do have 2-week-long sprints, and ours start at Wednesdays and end at Tuesdays. So right before the sprint end, that Friday, it is an agreement that all the deliverables in the sprint needs to be code complete, so that we have 2 full days of to test things, to fix the defects on them, and also developers would have the time to actually look at the deliverables of the upcoming sprint, so we can do some design sessions. It's this closed door thing. So I don't know what else here is worth mentioning. This one I like too, that whenever possible, we could split the work on the user stories in between the multiple developers. And there is even a sticky figure which holds the tiny leaf of unit tests. There is an agreement in our team that we need to create a separate task for unit tests, because they tend to get forgotten. Yet again, make it visible. Any way you find good for you. It needs to work for you. That's the whole beauty of it. Yeah, I guess that's it. I mean, we could talk about them more, but no need. Right. This is a topic in its own glory. I don't know, it deserves another like an hour or two of discussing. But if there are just a couple of things which I wanted to highlight in regards of test automation, that I do very strongly believe that it's something that we need to get in place in the project as early as we can. Because even if you are a consultancy firm, you are building a product for somebody. So you still need to make that investment into how it needs to get tested afterwards, because somebody would need to support it. And as a test engineer, it's not an excuse in any way, to say, okay, since I am a test engineer and not a software engineer, I'm somehow allowed to write shitty code. That's not true. And I do hope that there are no people in this room who would say that, yeah, I mean, why not? Because if you are writing code, you need to give it the quality it deserves, the same as the product code does. So there are probably 3 things which I have found particularly useful. One is hold the test code under the same quality standards as you do for production code. So leverage the knowledge in your teams, have developers do code reviews for the test code, because it's beneficial in both ways. Developers would get more insight into what's going on in those test solutions, because usually they end up being something everybody knows exists, but nobody knows how to use. So that's not good. And it helps test engineer to boost their knowledge and to actually deliver the quality it deserves. Second, it seems to be a no-brainer, but it sometimes happens. If you are working on a .NET-based solution, don't go writing your test in Java, because nobody in your team has the knowledge of how to help you with those. So leverage the knowledge which you have in your team. And yeah, I think those are the 3 ones. Same quality standard as the production code. Don't allow your testers on any excuse they can come up to write shitty code. And the 3rd one is leverage the knowledge in your teams. And yeah, it's a rational and beneficial investment, yet it will take some learning curve for people, because not all of them come to your companies knowing how to work with that particular setting, because every product is slightly different. You need to approach it in a different way. But yet again, that's something that is a good investment overall. As long as they run, they need to be implemented in the continuous integration process. Having tests which don't run don't make sense. Cool. We are getting to the end of it. And we still have a little bit of time, so you can go and take a better place at the lunch table. Because I forgot to say, in my mind, if any of you look to be, more skeptical than I would like you to be, I will just think that you are hungry. Right, and in this bit, like I said, Agile is basically based on the people who are working on it. When you read about how those practices came to be, it's basically all there is. Some people decided that we are going to do the best work we can possibly do by leveraging the means that we are given, the people we have worked together with. And there is a very good reason why there is a recommendation to keep a Scrum team small. Up to 8 people is probably enough, because those people, they need to find a certain level of relationship to be able to work together. And keeping the teams static, not switching up the members very often, it's also beneficial, because yet again, it's based on the collaboration of people. If you need to work with any other person every other day, you can't build up that relationship which is required. Not all of the companies tends to do it, but I kind of feel pretty strongly that every team needs to have a dedicated Scrum Master, because that role is very important as a mediator, as a facilitator. And you don't necessarily need to hire somebody to be a Scrum Master, but at least have a couple of team members in your teams to share the role, to share the responsibility. Because if it gets forgotten, then your retrospectives will suffer, your planning meetings will suffer. So it definitely needs to get that attention. One other thing is that morale in the team matters. And it's a good idea to have some traditions in your teams. For us, we have kebab Thursdays, where everybody leaves their nicely home-cooked meal at home and everybody go and eat kebabs. And yeah, it does make you smile. It is kind of funny. And yet again, it's something that's ours. And everybody knows that that Thursday is a kebab day. And even if our normal kebab delivering people couldn't do it that day, somebody else would come forward and say, okay, I mean, it's kebab Thursday, it can't be left forgotten. Get some inside jokes. I don't believe that there is anything else that shows that there is a healthy atmosphere in the team unless the team has something that allows them to bond. In our case, we also have a couple of those, but I guess it would translate best to a dedicated volunteer. It's a bit of a paradox. You can't be a volunteer if somebody chooses you, but that's the joke that we have. Because if nobody wants to pick up something, he will be a dedicated volunteer. Somebody would, at least. One other thing that does help to get people collaborating, to get that good feedback is out-of-office retrospectives. If your company don't allow the budget for them, screw them. Go have beers anyways. Yeah, I guess that's it. And to all the product owners, Scrum Masters, and everybody else who has a big need of micromanaging, like me, for example, there is something that you need to remember, as I do every day, that people do best if they have a certain freedom to choose what they intend to do. So if you are a product owner, don't go filling up the sprint backlog and say, here, this is what you need to deliver in those 2 weeks. This is something that teams need to choose, because otherwise they won't hold themselves accountable because they haven't committed on it. There was something that was brought to them. If you are a Scrum Master, don't go and tell your people, you go do that task, because yet again, it's not something that people would commit to. And allow your teams to find their own way of working. And I haven't forgotten that this was supposed to be all about quality, because everything I've talked here today, I think we can go back to the bigger picture, contributes to the quality of your product in a certain way. If you have a mindset there, you hold yourself accountable to the quality of your work that you do. You have already removed some of the issues which would still manifest along the way somewhere. If you, as a product owner, have taken enough attention to how your requirements are written and employed the help from the development team to actually answer all the questions and help them move on, yet again, you remove the big portion of problems which would come forward at some point. As a development team, if you have employed the practices which allows to root out the defects early on, yet again, we saved time. If you automate it and you have a quick feedback which runs on your short-lived feature branch and you know exactly that this code is working, awesome. Your test engineer doesn't need to be greenish gray anymore because we have a certain confidence in the product. And if you as a team, you feel happy in what you do, you would deliver better results almost every time. Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention, this is maybe just me imagining things. So yeah, that's me. I'm not a morning person. Cool. That's all I have today for you. Unless we have some questions, but I don't see any, but you still feel free to ask. Go ahead.
You mentioned that stick it on the wall and make things visible, right?
Yeah.
does it really help? I have the feeling in my team there are people that I have the feeling they find those practices useless, and they give me the feeling that it disturbs their productivity to do such rituals as refinement or such things. But you need to have it as a team, or it doesn't work, right? So
Yeah.
So I don't want to teach them, and I can teach them, but how to deal with that.
Well, usually I'd say that it's something that the team needs to commit to. So if somebody in the team doesn't feel that the practice is right, well, the team should probably get to the bottom of it, why it is, because you can't sort them out without sorting it out. So either somebody would need to bring that person on to why we are doing this, because the why part is probably the most important. People don't usually do stuff they don't understand the meaning of. So if you want to bring somebody onto the common practices in the team, or if somebody doesn't find like backlog groomings effective, maybe there aren't, and it's a valid feedback. Maybe we need to work on revisiting how we do those backlog grooming sessions, because they are beneficial if they are done right. Maybe we are not doing them right.
But then again, I understand your point. Getting back to the why makes sense. But then again, I'm at the same point, because talking with those folks, even asking this question, it's something meta. It's not programming, and such folks, they want to focus on programming and not this social stuff. This asking why and talking about this, they would like to focus on programming. So I'm again back at the same problem. So what's your experience?
How to get programmers to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in this case, every that ceremony of Scrum contributes to a certain thing, but it does have a goal. Like, for example, a planning session supposed to help you to find the efficiency you need to deliver stuff quickly, right? If you don't have a plan what you intend to deliver, it is very likely that you will get stuck somewhere along the way because you have no clue what are you doing. It's the same thing with the backlog refinement. If you took a story into your sprint which has a bunch of questions on it, then everybody's wasting time, because instead of being able to write code, you are going back and forth the product owner, saying, oh, is this button needs to be green or red? I don't know. So I don't, it's a particular setting, it's a particular team, it's a particular person probably. But the thing is that if you revisit how you do those ceremonies, and to make sure that they actually bring value, your backlog refinement session doesn't need to be an hour long. Nobody said that it's a rule. You can have a 15-minute very productive session on a particular user story, as long as it brings the value. So maybe that person who just wants to write code find those practices frustrating because they are not effective enough. So that's just something to reflect on.
May I?
Sure.
It's a matter of communication, actually. If you have someone on your team that isn't following along what the rest of the team has committed to, you're basically having a communication issue. And solving communication issues is hard, and it's a whole different skill set. Some people are excellent communicators, some are not. And I would actually suggest taking a communications class. If you really want to solve those sort of problems, taking a communications course or class or something is probably your best choice for solving this. Yeah. And it's because it's a people problem. It's not a problem with the process. It's a soft skill.
Could be both, right? I mean, making it more effective is one. Making it more effective, like you said, is one option that we have. But in the end,
and it boils down to most of the time explaining the why and getting them to agree on the why, or convincing them that we all agree on the same why, and that's a communication problem which is not trivial to solve, because communication involves people and people are non-trivial. Unfortunately, that's the long answer. answer to a short question.
And I still want to add my 2 cents to it, because sometimes even the feedback which you don't like, if you have a person who is not agreeing on the why, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is nothing to the feedback. So it very well may be that, you need to bring that person in to explain to them why are we doing this. But yet again, he may be right too. Maybe we do need to do something differently.
Communication is a two-way thing.
Yep.
So that he doesn't understand you also means that you don't understand him.
It's like Linda Rising, the talk that we had 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Basically, you start listening.
Yes.
Okay, we did got some questions. That's nice. Somebody says that a definition of ready is a valuable tool, but sometimes emergencies come up and you need to kind of forget about it and do a story which is not done, and how to not ready, and how to deal with that. Like the colleague nicely put, it's usually a communication thing. So, and it depends on the matter of the emergency, because some emergencies are artificial, because somebody would come to you and say, oh, you know what, we just need to do this one thing before we can do that other thing. And sometimes you have to stand your ground. And you as a development team, you do have a huge power, because those people who are managing the product, they don't know how to code. So unless you agree on coding it, they are basically, left hanging. So I believe that in this situation, every situation is different. You need to take a constructive look at it. But in some cases, you do need to make a compromise. So maybe you can start working on something before you have mock-ups. Maybe there is a back-end part which needs to be written, and that's fine. We know how to do it. We don't yet know how it will look in the front end. But so there are compromises, sure. But there are also cases where you need to stand your ground and say, no, we have no clue what you are telling me to do. So unless you come to me with some ideas of what you expect of me doing, then we will take on. Go ahead.
Well, it is said that Scrum and Agile, Scrum is just a framework, right? So it's just a set of tools. So you just have to use those tools in a way that is actually helpful for you, right? So I can't agree with you on working on something that is not ready to be started to be developed, right? So it's just like, if priorities do change, you have like all hands on deck, and you just have to talk to right people and just groom it and just refine it and just move it to the point when it's ready for development. And it's just like that, right?
Yeah.
You can't work on something that it's not ready for development because you don't have acceptance criteria. So what actually you want to develop when you don't know what is actually expected, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
And the same thing with grooming and communication, right? So I believe that grooming and backward refinement don't have to be a process. Of course, it should be a ceremony that is scheduled for the same time and place, like daily, for example. But on the other hand, we do have a practice of ad hoc refinements only with some people's interested in the subject, right? So if we do have some, front-end stories, we just engage with people that will be working on that, right? So, or with people that are interested in the subject. You can't force people to sit in the room, like 15 people sitting in the room, and only 2 of them are talking to each other, right? So this just makes no sense. You just have to be a little bit
flexible.
Flexible.
Yeah, exactly. So, yet again, just look at the situation that you have. Sometimes you have to make compromises, do refinement on the fly. Sometimes you have to stand your ground because it's just unreasonable what people are asking you to do. There is another question regarding the tech debt and maintenance tasks. Could it be wiser to do an opportunistic refactoring during the normal user stories? And the answer is hell yes. If you do have the time, if it fits, if it's a reasonable thing to do, even if you don't have the time, sometimes you just need to communicate to the product owner and say, we will have a huge problem unless we tackle it now. So the answer is, of course.
One remark, if I can. With refactoring and bugs, we often do things like, first things we negotiate with product owner. We want to have like 20% time for the refactoring purposes during the sprint. And second thing is, we are not pushing refactoring to the next sprints and not pushing bugs to the next sprints, because it's always, you'll always end up with, you know, end sprint being only a bug fixing sprint, and it's not a good practice because it just doesn't bring any new value, right? So you don't want to do that.
Yeah, that I completely forgot to mention. It is a part of our definition of done as well. Because if you have issues on the user stories, they need to be addressed in that same sprint, and user story can't close without that. It helps to, yet again, not to carry on the debt to moving on. Right. What's the relationship between test engineer and the DevOps guy? That's a very complicated question. I'd say it's a relationship of the mutual benefit, if I can put it like that, because the DevOps guys does a lot of work to help test engineers to do their work, and test engineers provide the tools for the DevOps people to work on the maintenance of that cycle. I don't know who asked that question. Maybe I can elaborate if somebody would elaborate on the question itself, because it kind of feels that there is a particular story to it, you know, the concrete question rather than an abstract one. Do we have the author of it here? He couldn't wait, he was too hungry. Right, did I left something out? Oh, whether feature toggles would be an alternative to the feature branches. In some cases, yes. It depends how big your code base is. In certain cases, if you are working on a smaller project, that would be enough. You can all commit to the same branch and somehow manage it. In our case, we do have feature toggles before we release something. It usually doesn't get released straight away into the production. It's toggled off. But when you have a huge code base and a lot of people contributing to it, sometimes having bits and pieces of it isolated to actually develop them is more beneficial than the feature toggle. I'm certainly not saying that no, feature toggles are not a good way. No, they are, but yet again, it depends on the context. Go ahead.
I would not compare those two things, right? Because like feature branches are based for actual development process, right? And feature toggles are a way to abstract those things out of the code base in a way of switching it on and off, right? So it's really important with continuous development. Our last project was a mobile application for one of the Bank of South Africa, and it was really intensive. So it was like continuous deployment all the time, and we had like number of teams all over the world working on that. And actually, of course, they did use feature branches because it's like a Git way of delivery, right?
Yeah.
But apart from that, we didn't actually have time for let's call that continuous regression, right? So having feature toggles make things easy, right? Because if something's not working and it's already on master develop whenever you match your PRs, you don't have time to, and you don't want to revert that code because it makes things really complicated, right? So you just use feature toggle, you just turn it off and then just fix it whenever you can.
I'm sorry, but actually I'm not agree with the feature branches, but agree more with the feature branches by abstraction. Because feature branches in some way don't enable continuous delivery and continuous deployment, because you are posticipating the conflict. So
like you said, right? So feature branches are short-lived branches. I'm not talking about something that is being developed on the site for 3 weeks, right? So
Okay.
it just when you have your backlog properly groomed, you have stories broken to small parts, right? So each and every story should take you like I don't know, day 2 or maybe 3. It's far from merging hell if you're referring to that. So we never had that actually. We had like 40 people working on single application in India, in Poland, and in South Africa, and we've never had that. We had some slight problems, of course, because you have to merge some things, right? But having those feature branches being short-lived just minimizes the risk of having that merging hell, actually.
Yeah.
And I cannot actually. For me, the idea of I know what you mean. You're talking about main trunk development, probably, right? So the idea of actually committing to single branch by 40 people in the middle of their work, actually, because you're not committing 100% of finished user story, right? You do have some commits, in between, right? Because you don't want to have one huge single commit because it's just insane, right? So committing to one single branch and not using feature branches, that would make things really, really hard to debug, for example, right? So you can easily broke something with something that is not finished and already merged to master.
Anyway, I don't remember exactly the name of the tool, but there is a tool about debugging in which you can binary search a Git commit that. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, bicycle. Yeah, you can do that, but you don't want to do that. These are like last resort tools, right? If you have to bisect all the time or git blame or whatever, you're doing something wrong, right? Because you actually allowed people to commit code that is not finished and introduces some problems. So I would just stick to feature branches. But this is only my point.
Well, unexpectedly, this elaborated into the huge discussion, but I kind of don't want to, feel bad for the people who just wants to go and eat. So for anybody who is interested to stay and talk, it's fine. For anybody who just wants to go and eat, you are welcome. I thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your time. It was great fun.